From the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, this is Nebraska Farmcast. I'm Ryan Evans. How active are rural Nebraskans when it comes to volunteering in their communities? Rural communities often depend on volunteers for a wide range of roles, including essential services like fire and rescue, coordinating community events, and supporting local youth organizations. The University of Nebraska-Lincoln's 2022 Nebraska Rural Poll asked respondents about their volunteerism and attitudes toward volunteerism in their community. Becky Vogt, the survey research manager with the Rural Poll, is here to share the results. Hi, Becky.
Hi, Ryan.
So can you talk about the importance of volunteerism in rural communities and why the Rural Poll explores this topic?
Well, as you mentioned in the introduction, rural communities rely on volunteers to provide a number of services. A notable example is the volunteer fire departments that most communities in the state rely on for fire protection as well as rescue services. Smaller communities, they're unable to have paid personnel for those roles, so they have to rely on volunteers. And similarly, those smaller communities have typically limited paid staff that provide economic and community development support, so they need to rely on volunteers to help organize community events, to support community organizations, as well as supporting youth organizations and activities. So because of this important role in communities, the Rural Poll has periodically examined volunteerism, looking to determine how many are volunteering across the state, who's volunteering, what types of residents are volunteering, and then that information can be used by communities to help recruit more volunteers.
In general, how often did you find that rural Nebraskans volunteer?
Like you said, last year we asked respondents how often they did various interactions with others during a typical month in the last year. And one of those items was volunteering. So we asked how often they volunteered for organizations and associations. And we found that many rural Nebraskans, almost 4 in 10, say that they spend time volunteering at least a few times a month. And overall, we saw 7 in 10 spent at least some time volunteering during the past year.
Great. And are there common challenges in volunteer recruitment in rural communities that you can identify? Maybe the poll didn't specifically ask this, but what are some observations that you have made about the challenges facing recruitment of volunteers in those communities?
Right. We didn't specifically ask some of the challenges, but when we look across the state, we do see some common themes that many communities face. That can include declining populations, so there's fewer people available to fill those volunteer roles, aging populations. As people age, they may become less able to fill certain roles, such as the fire department, and getting younger people to volunteer, as they already have busy work and family schedules that they're trying to juggle. So those, I guess, we see across the board, when you're trying to find volunteers.
I'd be curious about some demographic trends. Were you able to identify any of those in the responses about how often rural Nebraskans volunteer?
Yeah. First, when we looked at community size, we found that persons living in or near kind of mid-sized communities, they were the community size group that was most likely to spend time volunteering. So we had over 4 in 10 people living in communities with populations between 1,000 and 5,000 that they spent time volunteering at least a few times a month. And that compared to just over 3 in 10 living in or near the largest communities. So kind of that mid-range community was what we saw the most volunteering in. And then when we compared age groups, persons between the ages of 30 and 39 were the age group most likely to spend time volunteering. We found over 4 in 10 persons in their 30s spent time volunteering, and that compared to approximately a third of both younger ones, people between the ages of 19, 29, as well as persons aged 50 to 64. So those people in their 30s were kind of most likely to see volunteering.
And the poll also asked about the perceptions of volunteering in local communities. So what do people think about the role that volunteering plays where they live?
Yeah, overall, rural Nebraskans believe volunteering is important to their community. We saw over 1/2 disagree that volunteering and volunteerism is not valued in their community. And we had a majority, 7 in 10, agree that getting more residents to volunteer is critical to their community's future. And 8 in 10 agree that specifically getting young people to volunteer is critical to the community's community's future. So they do see that as important. But however, even though they might think it's vital to have that youth volunteer, we found opinions were mixed on whether or not the youth are being prepared to be volunteers in the community. Just over a third agree that youth are being prepared to be volunteers in the community, but 3 in 10 disagree. So it was kind of split both ways. And even though most believe in that importance of volunteering, many rural Nebraskans agree that they're volunteering less than before. We had just over 4 in 10 agreed with the statement that they are volunteering less than they used to, compared to like 3 in 10 that disagreed with that statement.
Then going back to the demographics question, did those perceptions about the role of volunteerism differ by age and even community size?
We had a few differences that I'd like to note. First, we found that persons living in or near the smallest communities were most likely to agree that getting more residents in general to volunteer, as well as getting the young people to volunteer, is critical to their community's future. We had 8 in 10 persons living in or near the smallest communities agree that getting more residents to volunteer is critical to their community's future. So we really saw that in the smallest communities. And as I mentioned before, that's the people that really, the community size that really is needing volunteers to help fill some of those roles. And one important age group difference we found was older people were more likely than younger people to say that they are volunteering less than they used to. Just over 1/2 of persons age 65 and older agree they're volunteering less, compared to just over 3 in 10 of persons in their 30s again.
And do you have an idea of how the trend of volunteering in rural Nebraska has changed over time?
Yeah, we have asked about volunteering in previous rural polls, but the wording was a little bit different. But in 2015, we gave respondents a list of community involvement items and asked if they'd done any during the past 12 months. So it wasn't looking at the frequency like we asked this year. But that year in 2015, we found that 53% indicated they had volunteered or done voluntary community service during the past year. And another 31% indicated that they had volunteered at one point, but not necessarily during the past year. So if you looked at the 53% that said they volunteered during the past year, that was a little lower than what we found this year. But with the question wording changes, it kind of makes it hard to make some absolute comparisons. But we found a number of, most rural Nebraskans were volunteering in the past as well.
Can you comment on the long-term consequences for these communities in rural Nebraska if they don't address the declines in volunteerism?
Yeah. Earlier this year, you and I, Ryan, visited about leadership in rural communities, and I find these findings about volunteerism are very similar to those. Again, we find in rural communities, especially the smaller ones, it's the same people sometimes serving in multiple volunteer roles in their communities, which was similar to what we find with leadership positions as well. And that really can lead to burnout of those volunteers. And I think that can maybe explain partially that finding when we saw that older people were more likely to say they're volunteering less than they have in the past. You know, they after doing it for so long, you just need to move on and ready for other people to step up. It also, I think, illustrates the importance of getting more youth and young adults to volunteer in the community so that that workload can be shared. And, you know, rural Nebraskans recognize that, the importance of volunteering in their communities. So getting more residents to step up to fill those roles really is going to be vital to their future. And if the roles that, you know, if those roles that volunteers typically fill are allowed to go empty, if, you know, that means fewer activities are going to be done by the community. They're not going to be able to host as many community events if they don't have as many people, you know, working on that. And if the volunteer fire department can't find members and those community events disappear, that's just going to hurt the community's ability to retain their current population and ultimately their ability to attract new residents there. People are going to be attracted to communities that are really able to do a lot of different community events and have a lot of services provided, and those are typically done by volunteers.
That's Becky Vogt, Survey Research Manager with the Nebraska Rural Poll. You can find out more about their work at ruralpoll.unl.edu and look for a new article on our website, cap.unl.edu. that Becky wrote, where you can find all of the data that the Rural Poll gathered about rural volunteerism in Nebraska. That's again on our website, cap.unl.edu. Nebraska Farmcast is a production of the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. For the latest research-based information and education resources to manage your farm or ranch operation, visit our website at cap.unl.edu. That's cap.unl.edu.